Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and today I am joined by a guest who I actually met amazingly through his wife. So that's a funny story there, but I was talking with him, and he has such an amazing background that I personally could not do it justice and don't know how he's done what he's done. And so I am going to turn it over to my amazing guest to introduce himself. So I will give the floor over to the one, the amazing, mystical, magical Artemaeus Treadwell.
Boy, that's a really hard introduction to live up to, I think. It's a tall order. But thank you, Michael, for having me. I'm really excited to be here, actually, because we have a lot of topics in common for being, I guess, average humans just living this crazy paranormal life and experiences that we've had and weaving that into information or knowledge that we can use moving forward for maybe the betterment of humankind, I guess you could say. So my name's Artemaeus, and prior to Tilly, that we have in common here, Michael was referring to my wife, Tilly Treadwell. My life was, I would say, pretty average, and I didn't realize just how average until after I met her. Things changed pretty dramatically, and in a way that I don't think I could ever have perceived. And I'm still wondering to this day exactly how I got here, because it's never anything that I could have guessed in my wildest dreams. But yeah, for to make a really long story short, she being exposed to Tilly, marrying Tilly, being with Tilly, has I would say made me a much more balanced person through exposure to the paranormal and what might be on the other side of the veil through many strange experiences, and then just coming from my own background, which prior to her was all essentially human evolution, behavioral biology, evolutionary behavioral biology. So a lot of my background was in human nature, you could say, and then learning how that can be expanded and evolving from there has been pretty awesome. So that's in a nutshell where we're at today.
Well, I have to virtually tip my hat to you to find the perfect balanced relationship that everyone's looking for. So, blessings to you guys, and
Yeah.
you guys are lucky. So, hopefully, not projecting anything, but many happy years to come.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it is, like I said, nothing that I ever would have guessed. In fact, funny story, we even though I guess I can start with the very beginning, going back to the beginning, which was we met online dating. We were both looking for a relationship, and we had some pretty good rapport over, internet messages. But when we met for the first time in person, I have to admit, I was so full of myself and such a jerk. I didn't like her at first. It was so weird. But this is something that I've come to realize about Tilly, is that she acts like a mirror to pretty much anybody that meets her. They have usually some pretty extreme responses. Either they're just so mesmerized and happy to meet her, or just thankful for getting to know her, or they're like, the other end of the spectrum, me, which was like, oh God, she's just so happy. And then you get so, I don't know. For me at that moment, I didn't realize that it was acting like a mirror. How she was revealing that as happy as I was not. I had a lot of garbage that I needed to work through. And just from that, initial meeting experience, that turned out to be pretty telltale for me, and really for anybody that I've seen that has met her. Wide range of experiences. But yeah, that first night was, gosh, trying to do it justice here. The thing that changed me forever didn't happen until much later in the date, because I did luckily decide to continue on with the date, because I thought maybe I'm wrong about something. We had such great rapport, via messages. that, maybe I'm missing something here. So went through, the rest of the date, and it was interesting because we finally started talking. We went to a mall, an indoor mall. This was before they turned into, what looks like zombie apocalypse material, practically empty. Although this night we were walking around, good conversation, and we actually ended up getting locked in the mall. The security didn't even know that we were there, and it's not like we were trying to hide or anything, but we went to go leave. I was going to take her home, and we were locked in the mall, and that's when security was like, "Oh, hey, crap, I'm gonna let you out of here." And by that point, things had started to loosen up a little bit. I wasn't, had my head so far up my butt anymore. And we get out to the car, and I'm getting ready to take her home, and she decides to kind of drop the psychic bomb on me. And she reveals to me what I can only describe as like a deep knowing of my soul. So, like a very intimate knowledge of who I was at my core, and not the like the facades, the characters, the masks, the egos, all of these things that the average human are just walking around day to day, living their lives as essentially an ego or a character. She was relaying to me things about myself that I had never even written down, much less told anybody else about just who I felt that I really was deep down underneath everything. And it was like she just reached in way deep down into my psyche and just plucked this information out. And as she's telling me all this, she's giving me further validation by saying, and there is this being who is representing himself as a Native American chieftain. And he says that he's here to help, facilitate this relationship that we're starting. And I knew exactly who she was talking about. Even though our family didn't have any Native American ancestry, my dad was a big collector of Native American artifacts. And we had been gifted, I don't know by whom, I can't remember where we got it from, but we had been gifted a very, very old portrait of a Native American chieftain. And she described this individual with the headdress and the colors and, the pose and everything about him. And this portrait hung on the wall just outside my bedroom door. And she kind of described him as like a spirit guide almost, in a way, somebody, there consistently, literally watching over me, there to help. So this first night, she, reaches in, gives me this information about myself, and further validates by saying, this other person that is associated with you is here to help. Up to that point in my life, I didn't realize just how starved I was for that type of intimacy that I think so many people are always searching for, which is to be known and loved on that kind of, absolutely deep core level, despite all of our, traumas, all of our childhood baggage, all of our defense mechanisms that we develop as a result of that, the nasty ones sometimes that push people away. Underneath all of that, I think a lot of us just want to be known, seen, and loved in that way. And it's tough for some people because that ego wants to be, so, rebuffing, like, to be that vulnerable is also a dangerous thing. And that goes back to evolutionary biology. Not everybody wants to be quite that vulnerable, even though, on an emotional level, they crave that, a lot of them. So I didn't realize just how untrusting I was too of really everybody, in that unless she had given very specific information to me and then also said, and I accept you, I love that about you, it would have been, I think, impossible to crack open that, really hard defensive wall that I had built, that a lot of people build around themselves after so many, failed romantic experiences, or even just childhood trauma, because we've all got it, no matter how good our parents were, we've all got it because nobody's perfect. And setting the groundwork in that way for me, I think, paved the way for me to be able to accept other experiences, other potential explanations for reality, empathizing with other people, and not just other people, but non-human entities as well. The things that she has taught me and the experiences that I have had with the paranormal don't seem to line up with a lot of the more negative or anxiety inducing or fear based responses that a lot of people seem to have with paranormal. And instead, it's been the opposite. I've gotten a lot of very positive experiences with the paranormal. And again, an understanding of perhaps non-human psychology that maybe makes me a little bit better of a candidate to be able to communicate with these other entities eventually as I continue to work on things, rather than what we always say that aliens and non-human entities tend to do, which is, lock their doors when they fly by Earth because it's a scary place to be, and don't want to interact with most humans because of that very um, I guess, closed off, aggressive, judgmental nature that a lot of people tend to just have as defense mechanisms.
And I just want to really quick say
Mhm.
sorry about the lighting. It was really dark, and so I was hit the button by mistake, and it started flashing strobing, and I was like,
I did see
no.
that for a second. I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what's going on there?" Yeah,
So I
thought maybe
apologize
somebody
for that.
swatted you for a second. I was a little worried.
And another thing I was gonna ask you is, as you were explaining, how you were on the date and you
Yeah,
had said, okay, this is not gonna work,
right.
and then said something told you to stay. I
Yeah,
wonder, could that be the chieftain's influence that she said he was gonna work with both, saying, wait a
yeah,
minute, don't judge too fast. Hold
right.
on.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, because I, I do sometimes think that when people talk about being communicated with from, the paranormal, it comes, it's a voice unknown to that person. Sometimes it's not an auditory signal. It just seems like it's just knowledge dropped in their head. Sometimes it's their own voice, but it's being, given to them essentially from source or maybe from spirit guides, guardian angels, whatever you want to say. It's that voice, that intuition, some people call it, where it says, maybe don't do that, or, do this instead. As you said, it could very well have been, that influence. Anytime I've gotten that sort of intuition, it always seems to be like dropped knowledge or even like my own internal dialogue. But yeah, I do wonder sometimes. And two, she was just so happy that I don't know, I would have felt terrible if I just, nope, that situation. See you later, not gonna do it. I've never been that kind of person. I've always been like, okay, well, I'm here. So, let's just do this. It couldn't be that bad because it was great, just chatting online. So yeah, I'm grateful that it turned out that way.
I am too, because I get asked a lot of times, why are you always smiling, and why are do you have any other emotions? And I'm like, I do. I just this is the one I'm in right now, and
Right.
so I kind of, in a way, can relate. I think to both of you, and thinking, yeah, I can see, how when you're always smiling and so happy that it can rub people the wrong way because they're like, what are you hiding? Because nobody's this happy. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like we're being our authentic self. And so we don't know how else to be. And so
Right. Yeah.
I'm glad that you took the chance, so to
Yeah.
speak.
And I want to apologize even for maybe anybody that's asked you that or yeah, asked you that question also, eh, that when somebody, oh, why are you so happy? It must be da 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 da. That portion, that's one facet of the ego. When people respond to you, they're not actually most of the time responding to you. They're responding to what their projection or expectation is of you based on their prior experience. And that's how the human brain typically works. It's always scanning through your experiences, learning through your experiences for things that either help you or hurt you. And the brain is loaded, front loaded more for watching out for things that hurt you. So if there's ever been an association with, let's just say, somebody laughing because they, were trying to pull a fast one on you, ended up manipulating you and hurt you in the end, it might actually cause you to be suspicious of people who are, actually genuinely happy or smiling. So that's, one more thing that I have learned about, human psychology and the ego that can make it so much more difficult to actually have genuine, intimate relationships just with other people. And what I've learned about non-human psychology is that many of them lack that sort of ego where they don't they don't have those expectations. They come at every situation afresh, anew, very objective, and looking at the facts rather than going through their own bank of experiences and then projecting that onto somebody else. So for me, that it took a very long time to for example, like she would ask me questions. And as a child, when my parents were like, why did you do that? It wasn't a genuine, like, I'm trying to be curious about your thought process behind painting the wall with a permanent marker. It's, you're about to be punished. This is a
Yeah.
problem. And so questions for me were very threatening. And if not me, other people can perceive questions as very threatening because if they don't feel confident in what they're saying and somebody questions them, that becomes a, oh crap, I don't know what I'm talking about. And now I'm vulnerable. And this is, red alert, it's a threat. It's perceived as a threat. So, um, again, I had to learn how to just relax into somebody asking genuine questions about me and reading me genuinely and then responding in kind. So, and in 10 years on, it's going to be just about 10 years since I met Tilly. It would have been uh, 2016. So, okay, nine years. It has taken me the better part of this decade to just undo all of what I learned those first 30 some odd years of life, 28 years of life, and reprogram then with being much more objective and of that what I've come to learn is more like non-human psychology and akin to what we have here and call as neurodivergent or people who are mildly on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, not of course the extreme ends of it, but a lot of that psychology is quite similar to paranormal psychology and non-human psychology. So
Thank you for sharing that. And before I go into an observation I have of that, I wanted to bring attention to Iron Bear 78. He's commenting that you have a Celtic warrior vibe going on.
yeah, so that's a story, a very short story I can tell real quick for some context. So prior to meeting Tilly, I very much identified with well, my background is almost entirely Scandinavian and Irish. So, that's the Viking culture would have been, pretty soaked in my ancestral past. So I came into this life with just a draw to that. And so I very much identified with that warrior type spirit. I grew up, my father was a Marine, and, as he did the best he could. We'll just put it that way. The poor guy had been through so much. I give him a lot of credit and a lot of compassion and forgiveness. But growing up in a household with a Marine, one of the tougher military branches for a father, you can imagine that there wasn't a whole lot of room for, emotional sharing or sensitivity in that way. So, it was basically, you're tough, you can handle it. And that became my ego, my persona. And always just felt that draw to the Celtic vibe. So yeah, I do a lot of, in fact, this entire three pieces that I have, my shoulder and then, here on my arm as well, is meant to emulate the armor that would have been perhaps common, and then also some artistic rendering. But that aside, yeah, that was my entire thing before Tilly, and then this tough kind of tough guy thing going on, and then for her to reach in and go, yeah, you're not so tough. There's all of this underneath there. It was oh boy, that was that was a very raw and vulnerable experience, but something that I didn't realize I desperately needed. So yeah, I carry all this as a reminder of where I've been. I don't regret any tattoo I ever get, because for me it's all about documenting the journey and the progress, moving forward. So this was been the first third of my life, and I've got other tattoos now already figured out for the second third, and maybe eventually the last third. So
Well, there you go. And real quick, I want to say thank you to your father for his service. And the observation I was going to make, that I'm glad you shared your perspective of how people see each other, is I grew up in the metaphysics.
mm,
So for me, when I would see someone, I would view them as a mirror of me. So whatever I liked about them is what I liked about myself. Whatever I didn't like about myself. So that's how I viewed every relationship, every friendship was, okay, what are you showing me about me? And what am I showing you about you? Are we, can we work together or not? What am I needing to learn by myself, and moving on? And so I wouldn't say I have a lot of friends that I would say I have attachments to and would be like, these are my go-to guys, so to speak. But I do make friendships, and I do, create like a family instead. And so, as you were explaining how you were viewing it, it kind of made me look at going, that's interesting, because the way I'm looking at it, I never thought to look at it that way. And maybe there is something more than just the mirror effect.
yeah, no, I give you a lot of kudos for even having the awareness to recognize that other people could be a mirror for you, that there was, something more, more influence there than what might be readily visible. And that's not something, I'll fully admit, I was a great example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I thought I was hot shit and that I knew everything. And the exact opposite really was true. And I lacked that sort of self-awareness. You could say that I was very egocentric, still very much like the average child, I think, where there's pretty, self-absorbed, self-centered in that way, and that's just part of their natural normal development for the average kid. I'm not saying they're all that way, obviously, because people like you and Tilly certainly are out there. And yeah, I so kudos to you for having that from a much earlier age than me. It took me until I was, again, probably in my late 20s. So after that prefrontal cortex finally started to, solidify and develop, that happened somewhere in your mid 20s, where that portion of your brain that's supposed to be there for critical thinking and risk assessment, logical reasoning finally starts to, develop more fully, become mature. It wasn't until a little bit after that point that I finally started developing what you have had seemingly all along. And yeah, so kudos.
Well, thank you. And we keep talking about the ego, and I know that's not really a paranormal topic, but to me, it's something unexplainable. And so to me, that's paranormal. Paranormal is anything unexplainable. So, with that in mind, my interpretation of the ego that I found that resonates with me is to look at it as the earth guide only. It's here to help you on this plane, this world, in this dimension, and that's it. Now, there are arguments of, well, if we're going to move on and evolve, we got to take the ego with us. Others say, no, the ego, in essence, is killed off. And others like, you don't kill it off, you don't take it with you. And I'm like, so I'm just curious, in your background and your studying and your experiences with Tilly, how you would view the ego.
Yeah, awesome question. That actually, for me, plays perfectly into all of the paranormal. It has a lot to do, in my opinion, with paranormal experiences. So for me, the ego is an avatar, basically. So when we're here in this dimension, in this reality, it is an avatar that's there to help facilitate particular experiences. And I agree with you that it doesn't ever really go away. In fact, nothing ever goes away. Everything, exists all at the same time, matter neither created nor destroyed kind of thing. So the ego is the avatar that we put on to have a certain very certain experience for our souls. I believe that we figure out for the most part what it's going to be before we get here. We come here, we have some choices and a little bit of leeway, but it's pretty set roughly what we want to experience through the ego. As you said, I think it's necessary here because part of it is trying to keep this meat suit alive for any period of time, however long you're going to be here. So it's necessary in that way. But for me, where it plays into the paranormal experiences is what I've noted is that the stronger the ego, so the more self-absorbed that somebody tends to be, the less perhaps open-minded that they are, and the more tribal they are. So what they'll do is they're very quick to say, that group or entity over there is either, friend or foe, and they'll ascribe a judgment based on that. And with that, the non-human entities who are very low in ego, who do not see good or bad, there is no such thing as, evil or good. It just all is. There's a time and a place for all of it. There's a purpose for everything. So when somebody is quick to judge like that, the paranormal will go, okay, well, if you're going to see me as evil, then that's a contractual agreement. I can do that. I can play that game. I can gain energy from this. I can match that frequency with, no judgment or attachment of my own. And, you expect a negative paranormal experience, you will likely very much get a negative paranormal experiences. So there's that facet of the ego. And then there's, again, that, oh gosh. So personal responsibility, for example, when people have a high ego content, a high investment in being who they are, high attachment to that. That means that criticism or constructive criticism is something that if you say, hey, you could maybe use to fix this, that may feel like an attack to somebody. They can't really take that as, okay, I'm trying to improve and be helped here. So it prevents them from taking that personal responsibility. And that's something that the non-human entities in the paranormal, when they do business, it is completely contractual and evenly cooperative. So when two of them come together, there's, we're going to make rules 1, 2, and 3. We're cool with those rules. We're always going to observe those rules, and the agreement is set, and there's never any deviation from that whatsoever. And it just works. Humans, on the other hand, because we have this complex web of thoughts and, again, childhood trauma, baggage, views about whether or not I'm a good person, so many different thoughts. And on any given day, add in also whether or not are you hungry, are you cold, are you tired, are you stressed in some way, will cause your behavior to deviate perhaps from what it is that you agreed to. And that's not something that, again, the paranormal or non-human entities are on that wavelength that deviates greatly from their normal behavior, I guess you could say. So if you're going to have an experience then with paranormal, and let's just say, for example, Tilly used to tell me stories from when she was an exorcist. And oftentimes what she would notice is that the families that needed the help were families that had a lot of issues with, let's say, substance abuse, alcoholism, or domestic violence, child abuse. There were a lot of um, red flags, you could say, things that even your average person would say, yeah, that might be something you want to work on. Probably, need to step up a bit in that way. But egos, so people who drink, usually, I know that's because I have a lot of alcoholics in my family. They will drink to numb the pain because the ego feels that pain. And instead of trying to find another way around that, they will drink instead, which can, well, we know health wise does a lot of terrible things to the body. I understand people needing some crutches to get through pretty horrible experiences. No judgment there. It's just when those things become chronic and intrusive, obstructive to, living a healthier life, then that is an invitation for these entities to insert themselves into that situation, because everything that you do has an impact on the things around you, whether you can see it or not. And everything that you do is either, inviting something in, or unless you're aware of it and you can, put up a boundary, you can stop it. So what people don't seem to realize is that when they're not taking personal responsibility, when they are um, doing things to run away from their troubles, they are still inviting activity. They just don't understand that they're inviting activity. It's a contractual agreement. They're not actively aware. That makes any kind of sense. I know it might be kind of a little hard to describe. Yeah, I can let you speak if you have any questions about that. Maybe that'll help.
It makes perfect sense to me, and it raised an interesting thought that I had, and this was an experience that I had recently where I was talking with someone about the shows and how they're different from other shows that other people do. And they were like, oh, well, when I did the radio, you had to do this, this, and this. And I would be like, well, that works for you, but not for me.
Mm,
And our tempers would start to flare, and my voice would start to raise. And I was like, you don't understand. You're talking to me about something you have no idea about what this is about. And so, can please respect that I know what I know and that I know what I'm doing. And as you were talking about, how you were saying the ego, I couldn't help but think, was that my ego flaring, or was that my self power going, wait a minute, we're not going to let you take control of what we're doing.
mhm.
And so in essence, not being of the ego. So I kind of wonder, where would that what spectrum would that fall under,
Mhm.
because that happens a lot sometimes. Is you can talk to somebody, and if they just don't stop and they keep trying to butt in,
Yeah,
people will go, well, you went egoic, but did you?
right. So I do have a little bit of input about that, and then I can give a good paranormal story, I think, to try to help with tie this more into the paranormal. But I do. It was ego response that you were experiencing, but I also think it was warranted, because you have somebody who is very clearly not respecting, your boundaries, your viewpoints, your input, any of that, and essentially are going tyrannical with their behavior to say, no, it must be this way, and that's my way. And the ego will then step up, because that feels like a threat. You are essentially being controlled. Even if you aren't being physically controlled, it is still something that your ego is going to register as, hey, I'm being taken advantage of here. This is not fair. And that's, the ego is great for those sorts of things, because everybody just about around here has an ego. So you do need one to help work with other people's egos. It's what I tend to focus more on is using that ego as a tool. All right, it's telling me that I'm being taken advantage of, possibly, may or may not be, because the ego is not always perfect in that way. It might think or feel that it's being taken advantage of, but it's not. Like that child being told by the parent, no, 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 you cannot have cupcakes for breakfast. This is not a good idea, to, reflect, have that emotion, have that ego flare up and go, okay, hold on, what's actually going on here? And then to de-escalate that situation before you put yourself into full-blown fight or flight that was catapulted by your ego, and now you're completely out of control, unfortunately, and not so great things can happen as a result. But that is something that will make you, not you, that person who was talking to you in that domineering way, will make that person more open to maybe negative paranormal activity, hauntings, or that sort of thing, but also to any non-human entity that operates more on that level objective playing field, that egoless playing field, that just wants to have a truly respectful communication, will avoid that person entirely, because there's no point. They're constantly operating in that high ego state. To further, I guess, a story about contractual relationships in non-human entities. So Tilly, she has the ability to speak to non-human entities, beings on the other side of the veil, perhaps in different dimensions, quantum realities. I don't know exactly where they're all coming from, and they're at any point in time they could be different places. But the one very negative, I would say, very negative experience that I had with the paranormal, most of mine happen in the dream state. So the stories that I tell will usually start that way. I'm in the twilight, so not quite asleep, but not fully awake. And for me, there's a reason for that. I'll give this little explanation real quick just to further tie in some more ego to the paranormal here. There's a state that the brain operates generally on autopilot every day called the default mode network. And that operating system essentially in the brain is there to help keep you alive and functioning in day to day based on all of your cumulative experiences. But unfortunately, it can kind of narrow your vision further and further and further. And it's the portion that goes offline when you go to sleep. And it's also the portion that goes offline when you're on psychedelics, those sorts of experiences, which is why we tend to have some pretty colorful experiences, because all of that, the vision, the way that we lock ourselves in, the ego just goes away for a little while. So in this dream state, I am sitting up in my bed and looking ahead or looking at something in front of me, and there is a mirror on the wall to my left. And because I'm looking ahead, I can see that there's nothing in front of me, but I can see from the corner of my eye that something in that mirror moves. And immediately, that system in the brain that's checking constantly for threats goes, hold up. I know that there's nothing in front of me. So for something to be moving in the mirror to my left, that means that thing is inside the mirror. And already the hair on the back of my neck stands up. That's that instant fight or flight that happens with a lot of humans that generally non-human people don't have. We have that lizard brain. It's there to protect us here. But if we're not consistently on top of it, we will constantly flip into that without realizing it. And then all of our behavior is dictated by that fight or flight brain. So in this dream state, all of a sudden I'm cued into, okay, there's a threat in the environment. And I get up enough gumption to turn over and look into that mirror's direction. And I see something very large, very dark, trying to come head first through this mirror. And the mirror is, I don't know, 12 by 12. It's a little square mirror. But whatever's coming through is so big that its head hardly fits through that 12 by 12 space. And at that moment, it happened so fast. I had absolutely no control over the immediate, visceral, and horrible fear, just paralyzing fear that came over me. Like, just fear for my life that I've never had, ever. I am fortunate enough to have lived a life where I've never been scared, literally, for my life. But in that moment, it was like I had no control over the physiological response that I had. I was terrified. And I literally started screaming in this dream state. Also, something that I never do. I've never, even when I've been scared or startled, don't scream. But this, it was like this thing just reached into my brain, turned on that fear faucet, and it was just like a surge of straight terror. And luckily, before that point, I had had some experience with lucid dreaming, so I knew how to wake myself up from that dream state. So I did immediately. And of course, I'm in bed. There's nothing going on. Tilly's next to me, but I'm still, palms are sweaty, heart's racing. So, and I'm shaking. So I wake her up and I'm like, hey, I just had this experience. I think you should know about it. And she didn't, feel anything strange at the time. She said, but based on what you're telling me, I know what this is about. I had a conversation with one of my closest colleagues about this entity, and we were discussing its relationship to human beings. And I guess I didn't realize that that was not something that this entity wanted. There was no discussion about that, no permission given, essentially. So when I left for work, Tilly invited this entity into her, mental space to discuss, what had happened and to apologize profusely for the misstep. And because Tilly comes with humility and looking to cooperate with that other individual just right from the get go, what can I do to make this as reciprocally happy a relationship as possible? That she was able to work out three rules, essentially, three conditions that were always to be followed. And I would be left alone and there would be no further issue from it. And sure enough, I mean, this happened probably a good 3 or 4 years ago. There's been nothing ever since. And that's just how non-human psychology, I should say non-human entities, non-human beings work, is that, again, there's this very tit for tat cooperative relationship. I agree to do this, you agree to do that, and it always stands no matter what. We'll always remember, and it's fine. They have that integrity that seems to be still lacking with humans, again, because of that ego that they have, the excuses that they can make, or even just this, again, this meat suit that has all sorts of needs. We tend to be pretty self-centered as a result. No judgment, it just is. So yeah, that taking that sort of communicative step, cooperative step, and all of my negative paranormal experiences, that was only the one that I had. Never again. So make of that, I guess, what you will.
Well, what I find interesting is with my paranormal background and the laws of metaphysics as I understand them, universal law, I would have looked at it more in the eyes of he didn't have permission to enter, so therefore the energy could not enter. And you guys have this barrier up, or we call them shields, to where if you don't have permission, you cannot enter.
Mhm.
And it works. And I would be looking at it there. I would, and to be honest, I don't think I would have the gumption or foresight to say whoever was trying to break in to go, hey, let's have a chat. Let's work this out. I would have been like, you broke the rules, you tried to break in, be gone, and be like, no, send it off or do whatever. So that's an interesting perspective and an interesting thing I might have to look at when doing some of my stuff, going, am I acting out of a script, so to speak, in a program that tells me I need to remove something for breaking this rule instead of talking to it and seeing why it tried
Mhm.
to break the rule? So
Right.
thank you for that.
Yeah. So that actually speaks to the mirror. So, for example, and some people will call this victim blaming. I'm fully aware that that might be something that pops up here, but people who lack the sort of deep self knowing and introspection and personal responsibility don't realize, again, what they are inviting in subconsciously. They can consciously say, I don't want this, I'm putting up a boundary, but then everything else about their vibe is saying exactly the opposite. So, and again, that goes back to that whole tribalism thing where if something is attacking me, then we tend to think, okay, they are the enemy. But in the case of these paranormal entities, they're only responding to what you're putting out. It's not just I'm going to viciously attack you for the sake of it because I just feel evil. We reserve that for those entities with egos, which are pretty much people. These non-human entities don't have that. So if you are going to, put out that vibe, you will get that in return. So that's why for me, that sort of deep introspection, clearing up as much as of your own baggage and owning it as you possibly can, dedicating, that sort of clearing up and knowledge of self will go a long way to aligning your vibration to the things that you are actually saying. So, but so many people, there's a term, it's called cognitive dissonance in psychology and therapy, where, it's people who talk out of both sides of their mouth. They'll say one thing and do another. And it's because they lack that deep inner knowing. So, to be able to look at a paranormal experience and say, okay, I'm experiencing something negative here, and then to be able to say it must be something that I am doing is already a massive step that most people have not even gotten to. I understand why someone would call it victim blaming if we're talking about human to human interaction. That would be the case. But in the case of non-human entities, non-human psychology, the paranormal, it's what we would call the law of attraction. Even if we don't quite understand exactly what we're putting out, the universe does.
See,
So,
and I find that interesting because when I talk with people about it, I'll say, you have to stand in your power, have 100% confidence and belief in what you're asking. You can have zero doubt. You have any doubt, don't do it because it won't work. And there's this law of, they say, well, you could say this entity, comes in and you're like, hey, you're not welcome here. And you mean you're not welcome here. And so it stays away. But then a couple of days later, you're like, I wonder what that entity is doing. They say you just invited it back in and undid everything. And so I like where you're sitting there saying, that's because you had doubt and you didn't fully believe. So we can talk about things and knowing they're not going to have power over us and we're not going to bring them back. So
well,
that's it.
yeah. So something else further to that too is that a lot of these paranormal entities will take on forms that will serve the purpose for the interaction with that person. So whatever vibe they're putting out, then the entity will take that form. You might call it shape shifting. Some people call it glamour. They're different things, but if have you ever watched South Park? For a little bit of funny interjection here, have you watched the show South Park?
I've seen maybe 5 or 6 episodes.
Okay. Well, for anybody else in your audience that may have watched it, there is a specific episode where the main characters are interacting with an alien, and the alien asks them what form they would like the alien to take on that would most please them or most put them at ease. Because at first, the main characters see the alien for its natural form. It scares the crap out of them. So the alien's like, okay, well, then what do you want to see? And these young boys, the main characters in South Park, say, well, can you make yourself a taco that poops ice cream? And that is how the rest of the episode goes, with the main alien character walking around as a taco pooping ice cream throughout each scene. But there's a point to that, in that, for example, so you're talking about saying, I mean for this entity not to interact with me anymore, and you know yourself thoroughly and you banish it. Which, by the way, if you're operating on a certain frequency, a certain vibration, you don't actually need that deflection. You don't even need the protection, because the entity's not drawn to you on that vibration in the first place. So it's sort of a moot point, in my opinion. But if you then say, okay, well, I wonder what that entity is up to now. Now you're actually exercising something called curiosity. And curiosity does not happen when you're in a fight or flight, brain state. You're actually able to think more objectively. When you think about it, when you're scared out of your mind, asking questions and being curious is the last thing that you're going to devote any brain cells to doing. But you saying, I wonder what that entity's up to right now, you're exercising passionate or empathetic brain, and that entity may come to you not as what it came before, but something completely different. So, and it could be the exact same thing.
Right. And I kind of was like, my example kind of went a little sideways because I wasn't meaning like curiosity about what it's doing. I
Okay.
was more thinking about it in terms of going to someone and saying, yeah, I had an experience dealing with that and this is what I went through. And so, in essence, you're thinking about it. So,
Mhm.
yeah, in a way, you are curious about it, but you're telling a story.
Right.
And the story, there are some people in the metaphysical community say when you tell the story, you're bringing that energy back into your field. And part of me is like, that's true. But another part of me is like, no, I don't think so because I'm still have the intention of it's gone. And I like how you say you don't need to do that because there are times I will leave an investigation and I'll get in my car knowing I'm clean, no attachments, meaning no free rides being given to any spirits or anything.
Right.
And I'll come home and everybody will be like, well, did you do the spraying to protect yourself? Did you do this? And I'm like, and I'll go, yes, because in my mind, I felt that that was already done, even though I didn't
Mhm.
speak it or physically do it.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that because I've often wondered because they say the voice is the word, which is the frequency, which puts out the energy. So
So,
do we
I,
need that?
right. So it's, from what I understand, it's about the vibration, not your intent. And those are two completely different things. As the saying goes, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. It's not what you're saying, it's what you're actually doing and following through on from that, vibrational level. So, practices like using Florida water or incense, or, they all can have roots in things that are scientific. Like, so for example, certain essential oils have been known to help calm your nervous system. So that will take you out of that fight or flight response. And for, spiritual matters, people will use some of those things because it does physiologically affect the body in a way that then has a spiritual or a paranormal effect. Um, Going back to that, the vibration versus intent, the ego produces a lot of the intent portion versus, the vibration, which is a very objective thing. Um, so those practices using, I don't know, holy water or incense or anything like that, they may have some kind of a root in the science, if you want to call it the physiology, but then it's also again what your vibration is at that particular moment. Any doctor can wield a scalpel, but only a surgeon is good at it. So
Right.
it's the same thing, and it's knowing how to affect your vibration on that level and be consistent with what it is that you're doing that will then have a consistent outcome.
Right. And I want to take a moment and point out we are getting close to the hour.
Oh
So I
wow,
want
yeah.
to be respectful of your time. If you need to go, we can. Or if you have a little bit more time, there are a couple of questions
Yeah.
still would like to ask. I just don't want to assume and you're like, oh man, now I'm late for something.
No, that sort of consideration is very much appreciated, and also that humility, that empathy, also fantastic practice that non-human entities appreciate.
Well, thank you. And my question for you, being paranormal, spiritual, all these different wavelengths, whatever title we put on them. My question is, when people are walking into, say, a building or anywhere that, and all of a sudden they get a feeling of something's there, and everybody reacts differently, what would be your suggestion of being able to approach it in a way where, like you're saying, is mutual respectful to all sides, being human, non-human, and how do we discern what we're actually picking up on and not projecting out? Like, for example, let me give you this example for projection. You go into a house that you're told is haunted. You step through the door, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I'm being watched. I feel it. And there may be nothing there, but because you've been scripted that it's haunted and all this stuff. So, how do you discern your mental ego, so to speak, saying this is what's supposed to happen versus what is happening?
Right. Yeah. And then that's a great question. One thing that I will say for starters is that it for anybody that has ever had low blood sugar, for example, we'll just start there. The feeling of doom of something is seriously wrong, biological anxiety, you could call it, can wash over you. And that very much can feel like there is, something out to get you. So this is part of being extremely self-aware, ever having had those experiences, especially to know, okay, could it be something like that? You go through that, mental checklist of, is it maybe something physiological? Can I ground it in something in this reality? All right. Low blood sugar, lack of sleep, like you said, the human brain is highly suggestible, and this is why sometimes court cases and their questioning can go awry really quickly unless the judge says, objection, or, the lawyer objection, overruled, those sorts of things, because lawyers can lead witnesses to say things that didn't actually happen, can produce evidence that's not actually there. So to be aware of that and have some humility for your own um, shortcomings in that way is a good start. um, Knowing whether or not you have any issues with potential mental illness. Have you been checked out by a qualified therapist? There's a lot of crappy ones out there, I will say, but can you clear yourself of those? Are you a relatively healthy individual in that way? Okay, we're good there. We're good there. Beyond that, and try your best to maybe not be suggested to. That's, keeping yourself as clean of those things as you possibly can, which is why some psychics are, genuine readers in that way. Intermediaries will say, please don't tell me anything. I don't want to know anything, because anything that comes through, anything that I feel, if I don't know it beforehand, means I can't be suggested by you beforehand. So taking those, real life considerations, I guess you could say. And when you've stripped all of those away, you've screened for EMFs. You can actually go as far as to make sure that you're not being manipulated in that way, because again, brainwave signals, physiologically, the body is sensitive to those things, and you want to know if what you are feeling genuinely is coming from, something like that. Screening for clear the environment for toxins, like if there's CO2 or something like that. I mean, I know this sounds like an exhaustive list, and it would be pretty hard in a lot of cases to eliminate all of those things. But if you've gone as far as you can to cover all of those known bases and you are still getting something, it's possible then that you are picking up on that paranormal influence. And, because everything is energy, everything is putting out some kind of a vibration or a frequency. We are vibration, we are frequency. That I believe once you have learned to tune into other frequencies than the one you are currently on, that default mode network that a lot of people are in. Some people are born with a gift, like Tilly, as an intermediary. I think it has a lot to do with just natural neurochemistry, neurological structures, that some people are just literally born with that gift, but then other people can develop certain gifts and attune themselves based on, what they've already got. For me, I know I've had clairvoyant dreams. I have had situations that I can validate with other people that I've dreamt about, and they either had already happened and I didn't know, or they were soon to come to pass. So my gift in that way is only really useful for me when I'm mostly unconscious, so that human avatar is not there anymore. It's just off, must be awful strong. But yeah, so if you already have a predisposition to being able to feel those sorts of things and get that sorts of information, that makes sense. But if you don't, you're trying to develop that, and you can eliminate all of those other things that I just talked about, then it is definitely possible that you're feeling something that's actually there.
So, is it because some people are operating on different frequencies that explains why some people can hear a voice, some people can see an apparition, and some people can hear? And this last one is tricky for me, and I'm kind of, I can't explain why, but is the ability to hear voices and sounds through white noise, because there's paranormal equipment like a spirit box where it plays white noise, and I've been with several people that go, it just said your name, and I'm like, all I heard was static and crap.
Yeah.
I didn't hear nothing. And so is it a frequency block that I have that I can't hear through the white noise, or is it I'm at such a different level that white noise doesn't work with me and it works with them because they're not at that level?
Right. So my personal theory is that for the white noise boxes, I think it provides enough distortion that it allows for the suggestion of something that a person can essentially hear what they want to hear. So I don't really ascribe to the usefulness of white noise boxes because of that, because for me it just feels like interference that somebody can then use to interpret how they want to interpret it. I don't think you're missing anything from that. I do, however, think that it is just like a radio frequency that some people, already have their tune to that frequency in their head just by default, so they can hear, certain things, or they can see certain things. And, there are meditation techniques out there that will influence you into different brainwave states that can put you more in tune, or in the vicinity of, to be able to perceive those things. And there are just some people who just, no matter what they do, they're just never going to be anywhere near that frequency, because it's just a genetic based thing. I would say EVPs are probably a better way to tune into those other, communications, on that, more on that note about the white noise box. But yeah, so that's and that's what I mean by, developing your, whatever gifts you have. It starts with clearing all of your own personal baggage and getting your ego under control, becoming more objective, more of a critical thinker, personal responsibility, like all of those things that a good therapist would help encourage you to do, just to live a more balanced life. That's the groundwork before you can develop gifts that maybe you don't know you have, if you weren't automatically just born, easily accessible to you.
That makes sense because I have a couple of friends that I can send them a photograph and go, I don't see anything, but I know there's something there, but I just don't see it. And they'll send it back with like 10, 12, or 3 things on there. And I'm like, how do you guys see this? And I didn't see it. And then all of a sudden, once I seen what they seen, it's like now I can semi do it and start to see things. And so I'm wondering, the fact that they showed me something, does that activate that frequency? And now that frequency says, okay, we're aware of this. It's something we can utilize. It's a tool for us, so we're going to keep it. Or is it something that the body will say, well, we only need it for this purpose, so we'll use it here and it'll just disappear for everything else?
Yeah, I maybe, and that might be again one of those things where it's training you to spot patterns, but not actually see what's there. If that makes any sense. Again, more like seeing what you want to see, and because again, the brain, that default mode network, will selectively sift things out of your visual field in favor of things that it thinks are more beneficial to you. So, which is why, some people will, be able to detect threats, perhaps, more quickly than others, because they have maybe more bad experiences in that way, so that they're constantly on guard for that sort of thing. So there's certain profiles of things that they're looking for, so they will see those things more prominently, more frequently. But I think for paranormal sight, that's just a completely different frequency, and it's not a matter of, like, training yourself into spotting those things. It's either you see it or you do not see it, and that anything else that you're trying to train yourself to see is just, making patterns perhaps out of something that maybe isn't really there. That makes sense.
Right. It does. And that actually leads me in a way to my next paranormal question for you is, in I call it paranormal again because I call it anything unexplained. When we're going into like the sleep state or meditation state, some people I've met are like me and instantly go astral. We didn't need anyone to tell us how to do it. We just naturally did it. We could travel off world. We could travel to different dimensions. We could travel anywhere and as fast as we wanted to. Never, and we could never explain how we were able to do that. And you were talking about genetics and all kinds of things. So, is that possibly a trait that you think is passed down, and why some people can go out of body easier than others?
Yeah. So I do think that, okay, so as far as passing it down, there are some lineages of families that do it. It tends to, run within the family, but then there's also even a concept in biology called spontaneous mutation or spontaneous evolution, where something will happen within the genes and then all of a sudden it just shows up. So that is another mechanism for change within genetic material. So both can be true. And yeah, I think it's just one of those things where, again, different paranormal gifts. So when I say gifts, I mean you could be particularly gifted at telepathy. You could be gifted at remote viewing. You could be gifted at astral travel, lucid dreaming. There's so many different paranormal phenomena, and they each operate on different frequencies within in this case within the brain, that people will kind of have to dabble around to see what their natural gifts are. Or healers, Reiki healers. I mean, there's so many, so many, and just kind of seeing what you're drawn to and what seems to be more natural to you. Once you become a little more open-minded and you figure out all your own garbage, that those sorts of things, you'll naturally be drawn to certain frequencies and seem to be good at certain things. Or you'll have had little glimpses, usually when you're a child or in the younger years, because that's before the default mode network in the brain has a chance to really start to close you in and solidify things. If you go back as far in your childhood as you can, and okay, what sorts of experiences have I had that kind of align with some known paranormal activity, and just follow that avenue. Then yeah, some people great at astral traveling, some people really good at communicating with other entities or Reiki healing. Yeah, we're all different in that way. And rather than bemoaning or being upset about what you don't have, lean into what you do, and make the best of that experience, most of it.
Right, and I agree. And one other question I have for you, and I'm not sure if it's in your wheelhouse, so if it isn't, feel free to say
Sure.
not in my wheelhouse, but we're living in a time where a lot of people are talking about like star seeds, hybrids,
Hmm.
having star DNA mixed with your human DNA and that it's activating. So I'm curious, when you say like, spontaneous, evolution,
Hmm.
could that be a star DNA activation in you that you activated, and that's why something happened in your life that triggered that to start,
Hmm.
and why you can do what you can do? Or do you think the whole hybrid star seed, all of that is a mind ego trip that's designed to make you feel or think differently about yourself?
Good question. I quite got never quite got it that way. Um, so to say that the story that we've created about the star seed is just an ego trip, and not actually true that we have hybrids here. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just curious, with your background experiences, your opinion of people that come out and say like, "Oh, I'm Arcturian human hybrid." Are they, or are they
Yeah,
on a script of telling themselves something to try and make sense out of their life?
sure. Yeah, and that's I. So I don't think anything is ever quite so black and white. There's probably a mix of the two. Really, is closer to the truth most of the time. And so I think there are some people out there that are saying that to try to explain how they feel so different from other people, maybe why they're not fitting in, because that's another ego narrative, is that we're always trying to fit in and figure out our place in the world, and these big esoteric questions. So they might say something like, "Oh, I must be from this other place," and that would explain why I feel so alien, literally. um, but it could also, some other people I do believe could be star seeds. And I feel like a lot of those people are probably less likely to say that they are, that it's, that ego declaration is probably indicator that maybe somebody is not, and that the ones who are star seed don't really don't really brag about it in that way, because it's not they tend to be less ego based in general. They tend to carry that non-human psychology in general. But as far as the spontaneous evolution, genetic changes, genetics is such a complex thing, because we're even finding now that there's such a thing as epigenetics, where we have the code, and that it just depends on what we interact with in our environment, that nature versus nurture. It's a consistent, back and forth yin and yang sort of equation that cannot easily be separated or understood, individually, or to say that it's one definitively over the other. So I think it's a complex thing going on, where we have a certain genetic code, but that, as souls before we come here, there's always that possibility within the environment that we can get influenced and certain things in our genetic code turned on or not. Again, that's just part of the human experience. It's part of that roulette wheel. What are you going to get when you're here? I'll say that there was a philosopher named Alan Watts not too long ago. And when I found his material, I really resonated with a lot of it. And he tells the story of how he believes, and I believe that we're all pieces of source or God, whatever you want to call it. And as such, if you're God, you're omnipotent, omniscient, you can do anything, be anything, have anything you want at any time. That in order to have a more expansive experience, you might split yourself off into pieces and put them in places where you have experiences where you're not in complete control. And we would call that a human lifetime. We would have that a human experience. So there's a certain, box of, that this is roughly what I'm going to have. And then everything within that. So the genes that can be turned on or not, there's a little bit of, leeway in there, but that is somewhat set, before we come here to this plane. So I hope that answered your question somewhat about genes and such.
It did, and I had to admit, I went back to look at your bio because you mentioned something in your bio that I don't know if you get asked a lot about, to be honest,
Mhm.
but it kind of struck me and stuck out with me. So, with the time we have remaining, I would offer to you time if you want to address it, or
Mhm. Yeah,
if it's
sounds
something
good.
you don't want to. And that is about meeting an Egyptian god or two, seeing
Yeah.
UFOs, and the strange planetary behavior.
Yes. Okay. So Egyptian god, great story there. We can do that. So again, a lot of my experiences happen in the dream state. So I don't know. For people who my personal theory is that when people dream, there are different types of dreams, but a lot of them, if they're just going to be the brain dumping garbage or whatever ego experiences from the day or from the past, they'll run through your brain. You'll wake up and you'll hardly remember them after you've woken up, and then you forget them as the day goes on. But some of the dreams that I have are vivid, and I remember them for a very long time. And those ones, I believe, are the ones where I'm connecting to, some paranormal experience, the other side of the veil, a different reality, a different dimension. So in this dream, I am walking on the sidewalk, and imagine it's like a bunch of cafe stores, window fronts basically. And I'm walking by and I peek over, and in this store, I can see it looks, if any of your guests have ever seen the movie Gremlins, where where the main character gets Gizmo, it's this,
Yeah.
dark, dimly lit little, shop with this doddering little Asian man who's wandering around mysteriously, So I see this sort of interior, and I'm like, yeah, this looks interesting. So, I plop my head in, walk inside, and there's people milling about. And then I see this little Asian man at the back of the shop, and he peeks his head around the people. He goes, oh, hey, what you need is over there. and I'm not aware that I'm in there for anything, but yeah, it makes sense. Okay, he recognizes me. I've never seen this man in my life, but we'll go with it. Why not? And so he points to around the side of the shop, and behind a false wall there is a stairwell. And okay, this stairwell goes down, 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 real deep down. And again, I'm not exercising any of my normal default mode network, fight, flight. Like, this is kind of weird. This little Asian man that I don't know is directing me to go down a set of stairs, descending to God knows where. So I go down these steps, and it opens up into this massive theater. And on the screen, I can see it's several Egyptian priests, priestesses, and what looked to me to be Egyptian gods and goddesses just milling about, talking to one another. There's a few people in the theater, and I just kind of sit in the back, just inside, or just outside the stairwell. And as I'm watching the film, I see this one Egyptian god who has the crocodile. He's talking on screen, and then he turns to look at the audience and proceeds to walk out of the screen down the aisle towards me. And, movie theater screens, they're massive, right? So what's interesting is that as he's coming towards me at the back of the theater, he's actually shrinking a little bit, to kind of meet me at my size, but he's still bigger than me when he gets to the back of the theater to talk to me. And it was so interesting because I can recall this dude looked hyper realistic. If anybody's seen an HD, OLED TV where you're looking at it, you're like, dang, that is better than anything in real life I have ever seen. That is incredible. This entity looked hyper realistic, high definition. I could see, he perfect. And dare I say handsome. Like, I don't give that descriptor to a crocodile, but in my head I'm thinking, man, dude, like, kudos to you. You look sharp. He was wearing this, pharaoh type headdress, like the sarcophagus that we see King Tut in. And he had long, the long Egyptian robe. And again, the color and the perfectness of this guy's face was incredible. And he starts talking to me just like anybody else. Like I was just an average person, and he had a message to deliver. And I could see he was, I could see that, like, the skin around his teeth was, elastic and moving, which is not at all like a crocodile. That doesn't happen. Almost like a badly dubbed movie where, you're watching it in the wrong language and you're like, okay, this doesn't line up. But I mean, I was hearing and seeing him, tongues moving, speaking to me in my language, and he's delivering this message to me that doesn't make any sense to me, but the message wasn't for me. It was actually for Tilly. And he said to tell Tilly that she's doing just fine, everything's going to be okay, and that she'll figure out, what it is that she needs to do, not to worry. And so, I mean, I didn't know what this was about. So when I wake up, I tell Tilly, and she goes, I hadn't told you this, but I've kind of been doubting the direction that I'm going with these projects that I'm doing. I just don't feel like I'm having the impact that I want to have. I want to help people, and I just don't feel like, based on the feedback, that that's actually happening at all. And I've been debating, what I should do at this point. And this happened relatively recently, within the last, I want to say, year or so. And she it was at this point that she had her own YouTube channel, The Weird Walk Home, where she was delivering messages that she thought would be helpful to people, and just was not getting the feedback that she wanted. So she was trying to figure out what to do. And me, having done all of this inner work, I know you said that a lot of people might be would wish for the type of harmonious relationship that we have, but let me tell you, it was incredibly difficult for a very long time because I was so opposite, so different, and so much to work through. So now, having gone through so many years of this, that I think finally Sobek was, as I later found out, the name of this crocodile god, came to me to basically signal to Tilly, hey, I have done enough work here to be ready to help with this sort of, project, this message. So what I do essentially is I take the information that she gives me and I interpret it through the human lens to make it easier for people to swallow, to understand, and then integrate that to help them should they so choose in their own lives. So it was kind of a cool um, checkpoint, basically, like okay, here's your test, and you passed, kind of thing. Which is, again, Sobek, the god, so is a god of making order from chaos, which I didn't even know. I didn't know much about the Egyptian mythology, but it was interesting to me that this individual decided to present himself in that way for the symbology, and none of which I was really aware of until, doing the research later. And then, and esoteric messages as well, descending down the steps into the depths to, reflect, basically watch the movie of your life, kind of thing. All of these are themes that, as I went forward, I'm like, okay, yep, this all makes sense to me. So yeah, that was a wicked cool experience that I had with Sobek. So
Very cool. And so you are now running the YouTube channel, and since we are approaching the hour and a half, I'll be respectful of the time, and we'll cut it there. But I want to give you a moment to talk about, share, and um, promote your show that you do now on YouTube. And I believe I have it linked in the description. So if we look and it's not there, I will add it. But I'm going to turn it over to you to share about your YouTube.
thank you. Yeah. So as I mentioned, Tilly started a channel. It's called The Weird Walk Home on YouTube. And that is currently where I'm doing a series called The Intermediary Diaries, where I sort of walk through all of my own experiences with paranormal and then what I have learned as a result of essentially being married to an intermediary or being for nearly these last 10 years. And so that's one place where people can kind of keep up on some of basically a video blog diary, essentially, of all of that. And we're also going to be featured as honorary guests at the Disclosure Now conference that's coming up here on St. Pete Beach in Florida. It will be, I don't know the exact dates, can't remember them, but I know that it's in July. It's like I want to say it's the second or
15th to
third week of
the
July.
20th.
Yeah, yep. So, yeah, so we'll be there for anybody if they're in the area, would love to come say hi. We'll be there throughout the whole week. And yeah, yeah, right. We're gonna hang out with Michael too. That'll be a whole lot of fun. There's if Tilly, or rather, Tilly's also a pretty accomplished author at this point. She has a book that she has some pieces in right now. If anybody's interested about things regarding quantum realities and time slips, this book here, Weird Time, she's got some pieces in here put out by Sean Castile and Tim Swartz. So that's some of the newer stuff that we've got to mention. One last thing I did want to add to tie in real quick, not necessarily about our links here, but a further note about ego and Sobek. So Sobek bringing order from chaos, and Tilly was having some issues with people very negatively interacting with her, with the information that she was trying to give, the information being trying to create some order from the chaos, and the chaos essentially being created from the ego. Not going to lie, from the ego. As much as we like to think that it's a structure, and in some ways it is, it's a character, it's an avatar, it does create a whole lot of havoc and a whole lot of chaos. So that was just another interesting point that I wanted to continue to tie some of these threads here through what we've been talking about. But anyway, yeah, so that's I think that's it. That's what we got going on right now, and appreciate you allowing me to plug that if anybody wants to interact on those levels.
Very cool. And I opened the screen up, so if you want to showcase the book a little
Oh
bit
yeah, a
better.
little more about the book. Yeah. Yep. There we go. Weird time.
So, where can they get Weird Time? Is it Amazon or do they have to
Yep.
go through your website?
Oh, good old Amazon. You find it there.
Very cool. So, I am going to selfishly say I have caught two or three of the intermediary diaries. They are really cool. They're not too long, so it's not something you got to dedicate like 2-3 hours each episode to.
Right.
So you can binge watch real easily, but kudos to you for sharing that because each one has different information, different style to it, and so it's really interesting. And I'm one of those that it's like I don't mean offense or anything, but I go with what resonates. So if I'm like 2 or 3 minutes in and I'm like, not really, I'll skip to the next one. And
Hmm.
that's what I love that you can do actually with yours. So if someone's not liking what they're listening to, they don't have to listen to it to understand the next one. We're
Right.
all
Yeah.
individuals, so that is really cool that you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, we tried to make it entertaining because that's something else that, another facet to the human ego is that we have very short attention spans. So we try to cater to that so that people are entertained, but they're also getting something useful out of it. So
Yeah, so thank you for coming on, and I know you kind of had to rush to get here, so I appreciate you making it as quickly as you could.
thank you. Yeah, sorry, I was a couple minutes a couple minutes late, but I very much appreciate the time that you've allowed me to have here and sharing that with you. It's been awesome.
Yes, and so thank you for our communication offline. We have lots of deep conversation and sometimes just a moment of saying hey. And so it's just as empowering to me. And so before I sign out, there's one thing that resonates with me to do that I'm doing now with this season, and that is to take a moment and say to you, and this is for Tilly, if she's watching or she can watch and catch it when in the replay. Thank you for your service to humanity, and thank you for what you're doing. It means a lot, actually.
Oh, the feeling is very mutual, and I feel that same resonance to you. It's pretty awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to everyone who's in the chat room. Thank you to Artemaeus, and hopefully we'll be able to get him on again. And if we're lucky, Tilly on as well. And so, if not, we're happy to have you on. I understand, her, what she's processing and going through. So, I'm not going to force it. I'm cool either way.
Well, just being that sort of humble and having the empathy, that is the key right there. So I know she'll be happy to come on the show the next time and speak with you. And we have, well, on the intermediary diaries, I have many more stories, and I'd be happy to share them here. And Tilly's got her own whole other world and an angle, a whole other dimension, I joke, that she brings to every conversation. It's quite literally another dimension.
Oh, I know. I've had a couple conversations with her, and I had to sit there and think, wait a second, what level are we talking right now? And being like, I can't believe I'm talking on this level.
Yeah, yep. It is m- a mind expansion, if I do say so.
And not one that, you don't feel forced into. It just naturally happens. Like resonance just matches.
Mhm. Yep, it's a beautiful thing.
It is. And so, with that, I'm going to say good night to everyone. Make it a blessed day. And if you're asleep, feel free to wake up and feel the hidden impulse to watch this episode.
Putting the brainwaves out there.
There you go. Okay, good night, everyone.
Night.